Hello, welcome to Hall Church. This is Pastor Dan. And no, this isn't a segment about a pastor being up a tree. I'm just using an example here to get us in the spirit of talking about the curse of the fig tree. We're in a series here. We're talking about Jesus' entry into Jerusalem in his last week before his death. Sunday we had the story of Palm Sunday. That's when Jesus made his triumphant entry into the city. People laid down their coats and took palms off the trees and laid it down before him. And the time he got to the temple had already been closed. People had all gone home. And then the second day was yesterday. We talked about when he returned to the temple and they had all the exchanging of money and the selling of the farm animals for their worship. And he pushed them all out of the temple. And he said, "This is a house of prayer." And then later, he did his healing in the temple. But today we're talking about his return to the temple. And on his journey to the temple, we have a teaching here that when he was teaching his disciples. And it's called the Jesus Curses the Fig Tree. It's found in Matthew chapter 21, verses 18 through 22. And it reads as follows. In the morning, as Jesus was returning to Jerusalem, he was hungry, and he noticed a fig tree beside the road. He went over to it and saw that there were not any figs, but only leaves. Then he said to it, "May you never bear fruit again." And immediately the fig tree withered up. The disciples were amazed when they saw this and asked, "How did this fig tree wither so quickly?" Then Jesus told them, "I tell you the truth. If you have faith and don't doubt, you can do things like this and much more. You can even say to this mountain, may I lift you up and throw you into the sea, and it will happen. You can pray for anything, and if you have faith, you will receive it." Have you ever really thought about this message? Or have you just dismissed it and went on? I've often wondered about this. Is Jesus being cruel to this fig tree just to make a point? To answer that question, we need to dive in a little bit. We need to understand a little bit of what is actually going on. And one of those things is like, when is Passover? See, this is the reason of Jesus' entry into Jerusalem. They're coming for Passover. And when does Passover start? Passover starts on the 15th day of the Jewish month of Nisan. In our regular calendars, that Passover traditionally begins in late March or early April. And for the year 2020, Passover actually begins on sundown, or at sundown, tomorrow, on Wednesday, April the 8th. Then we come to the question, when does fig trees produce fruit? See, normally they produce fruit starting in May or June. And they continue producing fruit all the way up to when they have the first frost, which usually comes in October or November. And a fig tree can produce fruit on the second year of being planted and even on the first year of being planted. And then we come to the question, like, how long and how big does a fig tree actually get? Fig trees can live over 200 years, and they can get large as 30 feet tall, and a large tree can produce hundreds of figs every year. So the question is Jesus being just cruel to this fig tree just to prove a point to his disciples? And the answer to that question is a no and a yes. So here's the part of the no. No, the Lord is not being cruel. We must remember that Jesus is never cruel. Yes, it would have been perfectly in his right, since Jesus has created this tree. I'm not just talking about planting it along the roadside, like how we would plant a tree in our yard. Jesus created this tree. It belongs to him. He could do anything with it he wishes, much like what we do with this tree that we planted in our yard. But Jesus owning this tree is perfectly in his right to do anything. But yes, Jesus judges. And if we are not in him, then we will be judged that way. However, he is never cruel. Cruel would be something like if we are in Jesus and if we are of Jesus and we are able to go to heaven because of what we believe in and the depth of our faith. And Jesus stops us at the gate and says, no, just because I can, I'm sending you to hell. That would be cruel. Judging for what you result in is never cruel. And this brings us to the yes part. Yes, Jesus was making a point. Simply put, Jesus judged this tree, and he found that it was not living up to what it was supposed to live up to, and it was judged. Yes, Jesus made a point to his disciples, but we may be asking, how can he judge this fig tree of not having fruit when it was a few months away from when it should have been producing fruit? And that's a great question. See, although fig trees don't produce fruit until May or June, the fig trees always have little buds, little sprouts upon them. They're not yet figs. However, they are very tasty. And this is what Jesus was looking for, the beginning of that fruit that would be upon that tree. See, this tree was full of leaves, but zero fruit, including zero of the little buds or the little sprouts. So in relating this thinking of a tree to humankind, this tree was full of himself, and he is not thinking past of himself and not providing any type of life for future trees nor any other life at all. So I believe it's pretty obviously clear to us. If we do nothing other than fill ourselves up with God, and we allow ourselves to grow tall and proud, thinking only of ourselves, then what good are we to God and for God's purpose? See, God created us to worship him. That is for sure. But he also created us to humble ourselves before him and to do his work, which is sharing him with others. And yes, this is something that I need to be reminded of more than not. When I begin to look around and I see what others have, it becomes difficult for me because I don't have those things. I don't have the ability to get those things. I would love to have those same things that they have. And I become jealous inside because they have those. Why couldn't I have those? But you see, most of the time, by following God and spreading his word, that takes energy. That takes time. That takes resources. And yes, putting it in a tree's language, being of God does decrease the foliage, the leaves, the growth of the branches. And it does take away some of the toys that we could have, which we can't because that energy's going somewhere else. We put that energy into making fruit for others rather than saving up those juices and putting them in the bank for ourselves. So I believe this changes our question from, is Jesus being cruel, to why did Jesus use this tree to tell his disciples that they can move mountains? But the thing of it here is, I do not believe that moving mountains was the true point which Jesus was making here. But isn't that what most of us run to? We simply think of God in the hugest ways and Him using His strength to do mighty things. And moving mountains is beyond our thinking. And so that's where it runs to. But I believe His point comes before that. I believe Jesus' point lies within His words. It said, I tell you the truth. If you have faith and don't doubt, you can do things like this and much more. If you have faith. Yes, He is saying these words to us, but He's also saying these to His personal disciples. If you have faith. Tell me, what would be your thoughts if I came up to you and I said, in all honesty, if only you had faith in God? How would you take that? And I'm sure that you would be offended by my statement. What do you mean, if I have faith? How do you support that? Would that not be what you would be thinking? But see, Jesus said these same words to His disciples who have now been following Him for 3+ years, following every word. Everywhere Jesus goes, they go. They've been with Him for 3 years. What do you mean? If we have faith, if we do not doubt. I always bring in the Webster 1828 dictionary. This is back when the word was true. The definition had not been changed to fit people's beliefs and so that it doesn't cause them to feel bad about themselves. And the words they used to describe the word if is suppose and uncertainty. And they actually throw in the scripture of Matthew 4:3, which says this. During that time, the devil came and said to him, this is when Jesus was in the desert for the 40 days, if you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become loaves of bread. So if I believe Jesus is telling us, if only we have faith, if I am talking about true faith. I remember a story of a very godly following woman. And she was towards the end of her life here. And she was on her bed and she had her family around her. And she looked up on the ceiling and she says, oh my, I have so much to learn. I believe we are all like that. Some of us just begun believing in God, and we have so much to learn. While some of us have lived our whole lives in that state of believing in God, but yet there is so much to learn. And learning only comes from being with God. How can you learn about someone if you're not with them? Being in His Word, being in prayer with Him, that's how you get to know God. That is why when we learn about Him, we learn of Him, we grow in faith in Him, and we continue to grow in that faith up to the point and even beyond our call home to the next life. But the question still remains for you and for I. If you have faith. Today, I encourage you to spend extra time with God. Dig deeper into His Word and let the Holy Spirit deepen your faith. If we live our lives for today so we can have tomorrow, I ask you, what good is that? But if we live our lives for Him and in Him, how grand is that? This is Pastor Dan for Hall Church. Thank you for joining me on day 3. Come back tomorrow for day 4 of Jesus' life in Jerusalem. God bless.